Understanding the Planets, Part 1. Before you begin interpreting charts or studying planetary effects, you must first understand the language of Jyotisha itself. You're not simply learning astrology, you're entering a tradition that has its own sacred vocabulary, one that encodes cosmic principles into Sanskrit terms. These words aren't chosen randomly. They are vibrational keys that open doors to deeper insight. So when you hear the word Graha, you must know it doesn't just mean planet in a scientific sense. It means that which seizes, grasps, or even possesses. The term Graha, grah, tells you something essential. These are not just physical bodies orbiting in space. In Vedic thinking, a Graha is a conscious force that seizes your mind, your karma, your tendencies. It is as if each planet is a psychological magnet that pulls you into a particular pattern of perception or behavior. This is why understanding Grahas isn't about astronomy alone. It's about understanding how these cosmic forces shape the inner and outer experiences of your life. You'll notice that the book doesn't treat planets as mere physical masses. Instead, it invites you to see them as deities with functions. Surya is not just the sun. He is the Atman, the source of your vitality. Chandra is not just the moon. She is your mind, your feeling body, your responsiveness. Mars, Mercury, Buddha, Jupiter, Brihaspati, Venus, Shukra, and Saturn, Shani. Each of them is a living archetype. And when Svoboda calls them grahas, he is invoking this deeper, subtler view of planetary influence, one found across classical texts like Brihat Parashar Hora Shastra, BPHS. Another key term you'll encounter is Jyotisha, Jyotish, which comes from Jyoti meaning light. But don't think of this just as sunlight or starlight. In the Vedic worldview, Jyoti is spiritual light. It's awareness, insight, the light of truth. So Jyotisha literally means the science of light, or more poetically, the discipline that illuminates time. It's not just a system to predict events. It's a lens through which you understand how time expresses itself in your life. That's why Jyotisha is both science and sadhana, a way of seeing and a path of purification. Now, to work with this system seriously, you need to begin thinking in Sanskrit, not necessarily fluently, but symbolically. In BPS, Parashara doesn't use English words like zodiac, planets, or houses. He uses terms like Rashi, sign, Graha, planet, Bhava, house, Drishti, aspect, and Bala, strength. Each of these carries layered meanings. For example, Bhava means house, but also becoming or manifestation. It tells you that each house is not a place, but a condition of your unfolding karma. You'll also notice that Svoboda doesn't translate every Sanskrit word. He often keeps them intact. This is intentional. When you say Mars, you might think of a red planet or a Roman god of war. But when you say Mangala, you invoke a deeper archetype, the one who governs courage, discipline, blood, energy, and surgical precision. Similarly, Shani is not just Saturn. It's the slow, weighty force of discipline, delay, and detachment. These names are keys. Use them with reverence, and the system begins to reveal itself more organically to you. Another beautiful dimension of this language is that it's not just descriptive, it's experiential. Saying Brihaspati brings the vibration of expansion, wisdom, and teaching into the space. Saying Shukra brings refinement, pleasure, and beauty. The ancient rishis understood sound as power, and in Jyotisha, sound guides your perception. This is why mantras for grahas aren't just devotional, they are vibrational recalibrations of the mind to align with the planet's sattvic potential. So when you begin your journey into chart interpretation, don't rush into memorizing rules and formulas. Start by steeping yourself in the language Jyotisha. Learn the names, pronounce them properly, reflect on what they symbolize. Let the word graha remind you that astrology is not about control, it's about surrendering to a larger rhythm that already holds you. Let the word Jyotisha remind you that every chart is a map of light. Light that has taken the shape of karma, pattern, and possibility. This is the first step in understanding the planets, not as objects, but as forces, beings, and mirrors. Once you begin to feel the weight and music of these words, you are no longer just studying astrology. You are beginning to walk the path of a Jyotishi, a seer of light, in whose vision time begins to speak. Understanding the planets. Part 2, Planetary Associations. One of the first things you must grasp as a Jyotishi is that planets don't function in isolation. Each graha interacts with the others in a dynamic web of relationships. And these aren't just neutral astronomical configurations, they are deeply personal. The planets have friends, mitra, mitter, enemies, and neutral sama, much like humans do. These relationships directly affect how a graha behaves in a chart, whether its results come smoothly, with cooperation, or through struggle and internal conflict. The idea of planetary friendship comes directly from Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, BPHS, especially Chapter 3, verse 55 onward. Here, Parashara defines which planets are mutual allies and which are antagonists. For example, the Sun considers Mars, Mangala, and Jupiter, Brihaspati, as friends because they share the fiery dharmic nature. But Sun sees Venus, Shukra, and Saturn as enemies because they represent values and energies contrary to his solar authority. This is not just mythology, it's energetics. You see, when the Sun sits in a sign ruled by a planetary friend, its expression becomes natural, confident, regal. But if the Sun is forced to sit in an enemy's home, say Libra, ruled by Venus, it becomes uncomfortable, even weak. This is Nietzsche, debilitation. Venus wants beauty and negotiation. The Sun wants command and clarity. Their values don't align. So planetary friendship isn't about personality, it's about compatibility of essence. When two grahas agree in their elemental aims, they uplift each other. When they diverge, they clash. Let's take another example. Jupiter considers Mars and the Moon as friends. Why? Because Mars gives courage and execution to Jupiter's wisdom, and the Moon receives and reflects that wisdom through emotional receptivity. On the other hand, Jupiter is wary of Venus and Mercury, both associated with worldly pleasure and intellect divorced from Dharma. In BPHS and later works like Jaimini Sutras, this dynamic is emphasized as foundational. Planetary outcomes are shaped not just by placement, but by contextual support. Svoboda makes this concept vivid. He shows you that when friendly planets are in the same chart, or better, aspecting each other, they tend to amplify one another's gifts. You might see Mars and Jupiter combining to give assertive, principled leadership. But when enemies like Saturn and Moon get too close, the results can be tension, fear, emotional dryness, or chronic dissatisfaction. It's like seating guests at a dinner party. You don't want to place two rivals side by side. The chart is a social arrangement of energies. Now, here's something you must reflect on. These relationships are not always mutual. For example, Saturn considers Mercury a friend because Mercury's practical logic supports Saturn's structural goals. But Mercury does not return the favor. He sees Saturn as an enemy, perhaps due to Saturn's cold and restrictive nature. So don't assume all planetary friendships are mutual. This asymmetry adds nuance to how grahas interact, like unrequited alliances in real life. These inherent mitra-shatru bonds are called nitya bandhutva, natural, permanent friendships or enmities. But there's another layer, tatkalika bandhutva, or temporary relationships based on current chart placements. This means even enemies can cooperate in some charts if their situational roles align. For example, if Venus and Sun occupy adjacent houses or support the same bhava, their rivalry may soften. This principle gives you flexibility. It reminds you not to read rules too rigidly, but always in context. When you understand these planetary relationships, your readings become much deeper. Instead of seeing Mars in Gemini and thinking aggressive communication, you'll ask, who rules Gemini, Mercury? Is Mercury a friend or foe to Mars? Where is Mercury placed? Suddenly, Mars's behavior in the chart becomes a story of relationships, not just a static keyword. This is what makes Jyotisha a living science. So, as you study the grahas, don't memorize traits in isolation. Study their alliances, rivalries, their cosmic loyalties. These associations don't just describe the planets, they describe you. They reveal your inner council of advisors, warriors, saboteurs, and peacemakers. The sky becomes your inner parliament, and the more you understand who's seated where and how they feel about each other, the more wisely you'll be able to interpret the laws they pass in your karmic life. Understanding the planets, Part 3, Planetary Aspects. Now that you're becoming familiar with what each graha represents and whom it considers friend or foe, the next layer you must understand is how planets see, because in Jyotisha, vision is power. The Sanskrit word for this is drishti. which literally means sight or glance. But don't mistake this for metaphor. In the ancient worldview, a planet's gaze is energetic. Where a planet looks, it influences, whether with grace, pressure, conflict, or encouragement. Every Graha casts its full gaze upon the house 7 signs ahead of its current position. This is the classical Saptami Drishti, the 7th house aspect, and it applies to all planets without exception. If Mars is placed in Aries, it will fully aspect Libra. If Jupiter is in Virgo, it will fully influence Pisces. This mirrors the principle of opposition seen in Western astrology, but in Jyotisha it carries deeper karmic implications. It's not just tension, but attention. The 7th from any Graha is its mirror, what it magnetizes, balances, or resists. But here's where Vedic astrology becomes even more refined. 3 Grahas, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, have additional full aspects unique to them based on their energetic character. You must memorize these not as rules, but as signatures of planetary intelligence. Mars, the warrior, throws its glance with urgency and control. So in addition to the 7th, it also aspects the 4th and 8th houses from where it sits. The 4th is about territory and emotional security. The 8th is about hidden power and transformation. Mars wants to dominate both. Jupiter, the teacher, bestows wisdom and blessings, and its gaze is uplifting. In addition to the 7th, it aspects the 5th and 9th houses from its position, both houses of Dharma. These aspects show where Jupiter nourishes you spiritually, offering expansion, faith, and insight. When you see Jupiter in any house, trace its vision to the 5th and 9th ahead. It's showing where your life is protected, guided, or expanded by grace. Saturn, the disciplinarian, is precise and deliberate in how it applies pressure. Its additional full aspects fall on the 3rd and 10th houses from where it resides. These houses relate to effort, 3rd, and karma, 10th. Both areas Saturn deeply governs. When Shani looks at something, it tests, slows, or hardens it. But in the process, it builds maturity and endurance. So if Saturn aspects your 10th house of career, it may delay your success, but it ensures it will be earned, not given. Now you might wonder, what about the other planets? Don't Mercury, Venus, the Moon, or the nodes, Rahu and Ketu, have aspects? Yes, but in the classical Parashari system, only the 7th house aspect is fully honored for them. There are other schools, like Jaimini or modern adaptations, that consider partial aspects or angular drishtis, but light on life follows the orthodox model outlined in BPHS, especially chapter 26. This clarity allows you to begin with the foundational drishti system without confusion. One of the most elegant truths you'll realize is that planetary aspects are not always about physical presence. A graha can affect a house without occupying it. That's the power of vision. In a birth chart, a planet sitting far away can still strongly influence your life in another area simply by casting its gaze there. And that gaze carries the quality of the graha itself. Mercury's aspect brings analysis, Venus's brings harmony, Saturn's brings structure or delay. What this means for you as a student is profound. Every house in a chart is not just affected by who lives there, but by who looks at it. You must train your mind to trace these lines of vision. Mars sees here, Jupiter uplifts there, Saturn watches from a distance. These relationships are invisible but powerful. Like currents beneath the surface of water, they shape movement and experience, often without being obvious at first glance. So when you study a chart, don't stop at placement. Ask, who is casting drishti on this house? Are they friends or enemies? Is it a benefit glance or a challenging one? Is there grace from Jupiter, discipline from Saturn, or pressure from Mars? This kind of seeing, this deeper drishti within yourself, is what will turn your chart reading from mechanical into meaningful. Because in Jyotisha, as in life, what you look at, truly look at, changes. And what the Grahas gaze upon, they empower, challenge, or awaken. Understanding the planets. Grahas, Part 4, Planetary Strengths, Nicha. If you've come this far in your Jyotisha journey, you've begun to see that knowing what a planet signifies is just one side of the coin. The other side, just as vital, is knowing how strong that planet is in your chart. Because a graha, no matter how benefic or promising by nature, can only deliver according to its bala, its strength. This is where ancient Jyotisha, especially as taught in Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, BPHS, and Surya Siddhanta becomes very precise and technical. One of the most foundational measures of strength you'll encounter is Uka, exaltation, and Nicha, Neat, debilitation. These are not poetic labels, they're functional energetic realities. When a planet is in its Uka Rashi, it's operating at full voltage, expressing its qualities cleanly and with dignity. But when a planet is in its Nicha Rashi, it's constricted, confused, or distorted. And the result? You feel that energy as inner imbalance or struggle. Let's start with Surya, the sun. He is exalted in Aries, the sign of initiative, courage, and self-starting energy. Why? Because the sun, as the Karaka of soul, thrives where pioneering fire expresses unhesitatingly. But he is debilitated in Libra, where diplomacy, compromise, and external validation can dilute his centered authority. So when Surya is exalted, you get radiant self-leadership. When debilitated, the ego may flicker, bend, or seek approval. Chandra, the moon, finds exaltation in Taurashaba, a sign of emotional stability, nourishment, and sensual security. Here, the moon's wavering nature is steadied and soothed. But in Scorpio, her Nicha position, the moon becomes vulnerable, overwhelmed by intensity and hidden emotional undercurrents. This can make for brilliant depth, but also emotional turbulence if not handled consciously. Each planet has a designated exaltation and debilitation point. Mars is exalted in Capricorn, Makara, where his force gets disciplined and channeled into action. Mercury is exalted in Virgo, Kenya, where precision and analysis meet perfectly. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, Karka, where wisdom nurtures and protects. Venus thrives in Pisces, Meena, where love becomes unconditional. Saturn finds his exaltation in Libra, Tula, where law, balance, and responsibility converge. Now, these aren't arbitrary placements. They are derived from centuries of observation and encoded in classical texts like Surya Siddhanta, where planetary orbits, latitudes, and declinations hint at subtle energetic preferences. In BPHS, Parashara clearly lists exaltation degrees, down to the exact degree where the planet is most empowered. For example, the sun is most exalted at 10 degrees Aries. This level of precision lets you assess whether a planet is just entering its exaltation zone or fully seated in its throne. But here's the key insight. Exaltation doesn't automatically mean good, and debilitation doesn't mean bad. It depends on context. An exalted Saturn in a cruel house might rigidify suffering, while a debilitated Venus under the aspect of Jupiter may still offer deep devotion. That's why you must evaluate each Graha not in isolation, but in conversation, with its dispositor, aspects, house, and dignity. Exalted planets can be arrogant, debilitated ones can be humble and transformative. Also remember, planets can be Nichabhanga. Their debility gets canceled under certain conditions, like being conjunct their exaltation lord or in their own or Kendra houses. This is called Nichabhanga Raja Yoga, and it's one of Jyotisha's most graceful teachings, that what seems weak may turn noble under pressure. So never dismiss a debilitated planet without investigating whether it has found redemption elsewhere in the chart. As you learn to recognize Uka and Nicha placements, you begin to read the tone of the chart. Are the Grahas empowered or in retreat? Are they carrying their own light or are they dimmed? This reading is essential before you interpret outcomes, because ultimately, every Graha is like an instrument in the orchestra of your life, and exaltation tells you who's playing at full volume, while debilitation reveals who needs healing or guidance. So take your time with this. Study the exaltation signs and their degrees. Memorize the Nicha points. Feel what it's like to have a strong Mars or a humbled Venus. And most importantly, understand that strength is not about domination, it's about alignment. A Graha in the right place is not just strong, it is wise, harmonious, and capable of fulfilling its dharma. That's the kind of strength Jyotisha wants you to see. Understanding the planets, Grahas, Part 5, Planetary Strengths, Sign Rulerships. To understand how a planet operates in a chart, you must ask one very important question. Is this planet at home? In Jyotisha, every Graha rules over one or more zodiac signs. These rulerships are called Grahasthana, Gresthan, or planetary lordships. This principle of planetary ownership is absolutely foundational, because when a Graha is in its own Rashi, sign, it sits like a king in his own palace, comfortable, confident, and fully empowered to act. Let's start with the sun, Surya. He rules over Leo Sama, a sign of sovereignty, radiance, and dignity. This makes perfect sense. Surya is the source of all light, the Atman or soul, and Leo expresses personal power, leadership, and visibility. When the sun is in Leo, its natural energy flows outward without distortion. It feels no need to prove, it simply is. And this idea of rulership isn't poetic. It's embedded in the very grammar of classical Jyotisha, particularly Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra and Surya Siddhanta. The moon, Chandra, rules Cancer, Karka, the sign of nurturing, emotional ebb and flow, and intuitive intelligence. Why? Because Chandra governs the manas, the mind, feelings, memory, and imagination. Cancer provides the watery, receptive medium for that to thrive. When Chandra is in Cancer, you get emotional intelligence, tenderness, and depth of feeling, like a lotus floating on water. Mars, Mangala, rules two signs, Aries, Mesha, and Scorpioshka. Aries gives Mars a platform for action, courage, initiation. The Scorpio, on the other hand, gives Mars its strategic depth, secrecy, and inner control. The same fiery force expresses itself as both overt willpower and covert transformation. This dual rulership tells you that every Graha has more than one face. Mercury Buddha is lord of Gemini, Mithuna, and Virgo, Kanya. In Gemini, Mercury plays the role of the communicator, flexible, curious, social. In Virgo, it becomes analytical, detail-oriented, perfectionist. The intellect adapts itself to context, outward in Gemini, inward in Virgo. This polarity gives Mercury its reputation for versatility and cleverness. Jupiter, Brihaspati, rules Sagittarius, Danu, and Pisces, Meena. In Sagittarius, his wisdom moves outward. It becomes philosophy, truth-seeking, teaching. In Pisces, his wisdom turns inward. It becomes spirituality, compassion, devotion. Both signs express Jupiter's expansive, sattvic nature, but through different lenses. One rational and extroverted, the other mystical and introverted. These rulerships reflect Jupiter's deep role as the guru, the dispeller of darkness. Venus, Shukra, is the lord of Taurus, Vrishabha, and Libra, Tula. In Taurus, Venus expresses itself through beauty, sensuality, stability, and artistic pleasure. In Libra, Venus becomes the diplomat, balancing justice, fairness, aesthetics, and relationship harmony. This shows you that Venus governs not only love and art, but also judgment, refinement, and social intelligence. Finally, Saturn, Shani, rules Capricorn, Makara, and Aquarius, Kumbha. In Capricorn, Saturn becomes the builder, the taskmaster, the disciplinarian who insists on structure, integrity, and time. In Aquarius, Saturn evolves. He becomes the social reformer, the visionary who builds for the collective good. These two signs show Saturn's long-range intelligence. In Capricorn, he disciplines the individual. In Aquarius, he refines the system. Now, these rulerships are not just memorization tools, they're karmic jurisdictions. When a planet owns a house in a chart, it becomes responsible for the karma associated with that house. If that planet is strong, dignified, or well-placed, it can protect and uplift that house. If weak, afflicted, or combust, it may distort the house's results. For example, if Venus owns your fifth house and is exalted, your creativity and love life flourish. If it's debilitated, you may face confusion or sacrifice in these areas. You also must observe dispositorship. If Mercury is in Taurus, it is disposited by Venus, who rules Taurus. That means Mercury's functioning depends in part on how strong Venus is. These invisible threads of rulership form a Graha Loka, a network of control and influence that underpins every chart. Understanding this system allows you to track planetary alliances, dependencies, and vulnerabilities with precision. In essence, sign rulership shows you where a planet belongs and how it behaves when at home versus when it's a guest, or worse, a trespasser, in someone else's domain. It gives structure to the planetary story, defining whose house each Graha is visiting and whether that visit is comfortable, strained, or disruptive. And when you honor this layer of the chart, you stop reading planets in isolation. You begin to see them as kings, ministers, and emissaries moving across a kingdom, each empowered or constrained by the houses they rule, the hosts they visit, and the alliances they form.